6 a.m. Look at that beautiful sunset. What is up, guys? Desert Chief here with another episode of Chasing Dust. I'm out here in beautiful Costa Mesa, California, where we shot the lunch truck video, the first one. Those are our very first episode at Sheer Performance. Today I got another little project I want to show you guys. This is my own personal project, something I've been working on continuously for the last 3 years or so. Being the truck editor at Driving Line, yes, this one is a truck. I know last week's episode was about the Crown Victoria. I do also have a truck, don't worry. I want to tell you a little bit more about it and, you know, the history behind it, what it means to me, and what's in store for this project, because I got a lot of really cool plans that's going to be implemented into this thing over the next year or so. Let's get inside. I want to show it to you. So this is my 1991 Toyota pickup four-wheel drive, nicknamed Scarlett. For obvious reasons, the truck is mostly red. I get a lot of people asking me, Matt, what do you do for fun? And the simple answer is off-roading. It's my #1 biggest passion. I do it whenever I have free time, whenever I've got, you know, a weekend to spare. I'll be out there in the desert, in the mountains, wherever I can get to, just do a little bit of wheeling and get away from it all and have a lot of fun. That's just really been a big part of my life for the last 10 years is off-road. I've had plenty of off-road trucks in the past. They were good in their own way, but they weren't really exactly what I was looking for and what I wanted out of an off-road truck until I came across this thing right here. So I'm gonna tell you a little bit about how I got it and you know, what I've done to it so far and what's coming next for it and some of the questions that people ask me, because I get a ton of questions about this truck all the time. So a little bit of a brief description of what it actually is. It's a 1991 Toyota pickup. This is before the Tacoma was even a thing. This model was an original four-wheel drive. It's a 91, which means it has the independent front suspension. 86 was the year where they switched over to IFS, and all the previous four-wheel drive models were a solid axle. I'm more of a desert guy myself, so the IFS setup just worked out better anyway. This is the extended cab with the 6-foot bed, and that's how it came originally from the factory. The body's the original body, it's on the original frame. All that's pretty much still there from Toyota. Obviously there's a lot of modifications made to this truck. It's definitely not a stock pickup. I'll get into those modifications a little bit later, but first I want to give you guys a little bit of a history of how I got the truck. About 3 years ago, I was looking for an off-road truck to buy. I was scouring Craigslist and seeing what I can come up with. At the time, I was driving a single cab 2005 Toyota Tacoma with a 4-cylinder, which is the 2TR FE motor. And it had a Total Chaos long travel kit on the front and a giant link killer in the rear, which is just basically an underslung leaf pack, which goes underneath the axle. And it had some triple bypass shocks on it. And it was a fun truck. It was just kind of small. It was a single cab. It didn't have a cage. I was looking for something that had a cage in it. Being as though I'm not a fabricator, I don't have the skills to build a cage on my own. Admittedly, I would love to learn how to fabricate. So I figured the next best thing is just to find a truck that's already got a cage in it, that's really well built, and that way I don't need to, you know, send it out to a fabrication shop and spend thousands of dollars to have a cage built for it. I got really lucky with this truck. It was actually on Race Desert, which is has classifieds on it, and it just turned out that it was literally a quarter mile away from my office. at a shop that was nearby called Racing down in Oceanside, California. I drove down there on my lunch break and met with the owner. His name is Mike Sheehan. He was the owner of this truck before me. And Mike and I are actually great friends now. It's funny how that works out when you buy a truck from somebody and you're good friends with them. So Mike and I worked out a deal where I was actually, we traded our trucks. So he needed something that was a little bit more of a daily driver friendly vehicle. I wanted something that was a little bit more built and capable for off-road use, and I wasn't planning on daily driving it. So that was okay that, you know, it wasn't so comfortable for a daily. It was great because I got what I wanted, he got what he wanted. What did it look like when I first picked it up? Well, physically, it didn't look very different from what you see here. I mean, it had the same fenders, it had the same bed sides, same front bumper, you know, it was the same color. It did have some different tires on it, and it had a 15-inch wheel, which looks kind of cool if you're into the old school look. That's really about it. The cage was all there, everything was all done. And speaking of the cage, that was really one of the selling points for this truck for me, was that it was built by a guy who is a fabricator. Mike Sheehan is a fabricator at Racing, and they build all kinds of really cool race vehicles and Broncos. And I knew that, you know, they did such a great job with all their customers' work that Mike, you know, would take extra care of working on his own truck. So he has. This truck is actually built with a 2-inch diameter chromoly cage tubing. So it actually is stronger than your normal DOM or drawn over mandrel, you know, steel tubing. Chromoly is known to be stronger, and it's used in all kinds of race applications as a stronger metal. So when I found out that it had a chromoly cage and that it was a 2-inch diameter, that was a huge selling point for me, was that it was built very, very well. It had a great layout to it. All the welds were done really nicely. It was plated to the body. There was, you know, all kinds of dimple dies on the inside of it. It did have a old Total Chaos suspension system on it. It was a long travel kit with tubular arms, so that's what came on there, and it had a Bilstein shock on the front and Bilstein shocks in the rear. The truck did very well for the first iteration and what I had it for. Some of the downsides to this truck when I first went to go look at it was that it did have the dreaded 3-liter V6. If you guys don't know about Toyota's 3-liter V6 in these trucks, also the code name for the engine is the 3VZE. It is notorious for having issues, and the main problem is really blowing head gaskets. That's something that the 3.0s are unanimously known for, is blowing head gaskets and leaving, you know, the owner stranded somewhere and the engine doesn't run. And it was a big problem, such a big problem that Toyota actually launched a recall campaign to fix the issue, or at least do their best to fix the issue. But even after the recall was performed on a lot of vehicles, they still broke. So it was a big problem for Toyota. It was actually the very first V6 that they built in these trucks, and it's the first and last V6 they built that was a single overhead cam. So every single V6 you see out there on Toyota vehicles now are all dual overhead cam. I don't know if that has anything to do with the bad juju they got from this motor, but they never built a 2-valve motor after that. The best way to describe this 3-liter is unreliable, and it has the power of a 4-cylinder with the gas mileage of a V8. So overall, just a pretty bad engine. For some reason, I have no idea why, the 3-liter that's in this truck is indestructible. Never blown a head gasket. It hasn't been in for the recall as far as I know. Just some sort of a factory freak that just never had any issues. Especially for the way that I drove this thing, and I can only assume the way Mike drove it, you need to almost be redlined in the first 3 years just to get up to speed on the highway. It is a 5-speed manual, so you can control how far up you go with the revs. And in the desert, on the streets, I'm constantly redlining this motor, and it still runs. It just never gives up. Despite having the 3-liter issue, Mike did have a upgraded engine he was going to put in it that he gave me with the deal, and it was a 3.4 liter, which comes in the later year Tacomas, the first gen Tacoma, which is from 96 to 2004. And that's a very popular swap. It actually bolts right into the engine mounts, bolts up to the factory transmission in this truck, and it's a really easy swap. And I was dead set on doing that until now. Over the last 3 years of owning this vehicle, some of the suspension modifications I made are upgrading it to a boxed arm Total Chaos long travel system, brand new with King shocks, with their 8-inch coilovers. In the rear, I kept the leaf springs because they were working out just fine. It was a Deaver F67 pack. They make a great product, and so I kept that Deaver pack back there, and it was great. I did have a 16-inch King Smooth body shock in the back. That's what I added, took the Bilsteins off of it, did all the King shocks in there. I did change the shock hoops as well, made those a little bit stronger. I did change the wheels and tires on the truck too. Really happy that I did, because the tires that were on there before were okay in the desert, horrible on the street. They were race tires, so they actually made a lot of noise going down the road, and they had flat spots. So I upgraded it to a 35 1250 17 Nitto Ridge Grappler, which is by far the best off-road tire that I've ever had, and on-road tire. It's actually, I put it on my daily trucks as well. Very, very happy with the Nittos. It's been fantastic in the rocks, you know, in the sand, snow, mud, anything that I can throw at it. I've also got KMC machete bead locks on there and a 17-inch wheel, so it's a little bit of a larger wheel than what came on the truck, but I'm okay with that. It looks a little bit more modern. I actually like the way it looks. On the inside, I've done a few things. I added a set of headsets so that you can talk on the radio with your co-driver. I did also take the old seats that were in it. They were old PRP bucket seats. I pulled those out and I put some new ones in there. They have the red piping on them, so it matches the truck a little bit more, and they're newer, no tears in them, so they look really nice. I'm really happy I did that. It makes it much more comfortable to drive. As far as lighting goes, the truck didn't really have a whole lot of auxiliary lighting on it when I purchased it. I did put some 9-inch HID red ring lights on the front bumper. I did also change the headlights to LED, which was a huge improvement over the factory headlights. I gotta tell you, if you ever need to change the 5x7 lights into your truck or your XJ or your van or whatever, LEDs are awesome. I will never go back to a regular halogen because you can't see anything at night with those things compared to these LEDs, which are much, much brighter. Moving around to the back side of the truck, I can show you some of the bed cage work. This here is a mount for a Power Tank 10-pound bottle, which is a great upgrade for anybody who goes off-roading and finds themselves airing down and needing to air their tires back up. I don't have the tank on there right now, but this is the mount for it. This is where the tank sits. It's filled with CO2, and you can air your tires up real easy with that. Down here, we've got an Optima yellow top battery. It's been kicking butt for years, and it just doesn't give up. Give you guys a little bit of a look at the layout of the bed cage here. Full-size spare mount with a PRP strap holding it down here. Custom license plate, because why not? I do have a mount for a Harbor Freight aluminum jack right here with the jack handle bolted to the side of the bed cage. This is kind of in rough shape, but I'm going to redo all this. There's no big deal there. The truck does have Hanneman fiberglass on it, bedsides and front fenders, which I love because they're actually very sturdy and very strong bedsides, very thick fiberglass. It's great for desert use. We do have the factory Toyota 8-inch rear axle. The front and rear differentials are re-geared to 456 gear ratio. It does have a custom light box back here, which does work with the brake lights. It does also have 2 amber lights in the middle, and the outers are red for brakes. So I love this thing. It's kind of a very unique look to the truck. Gives it a little shark fin kind of look to it, and I get a lot of compliments on that, so I don't think that's going to go anywhere. Over here, there is a mount for a 5-gallon fuel jug. If you're going to be using that off-road, you find yourself maybe needing some more fuel. That's a very easy way to strap that down. And of course, it does utilize the factory fuel tank. So you can see here the fuel tank is in the factory location, and it works well with the leaf spring suspension that's on the truck. Now, as you can see, the leaf springs do go underneath the axle, and they have longer shackles at the back that allow it to swing and get a lot more travel out of the rear, which is great for desert driving and crawling as well. I haven't really found any issues with it while on the rocks. A lot of people say that you get a lot of ground clearance problems with underslung leaf springs, but I haven't found that problem yet. I can show you guys a little bit what the cage tubing and everything looks like. Moving on here to the inside of the truck, I can show you guys a little bit more of the cage layout. As you can see, there's dimpled eyes all around. The cage does come down the A pillar, B pillar, and C pillar. There is some bracing in here. That's a little dark in here. I know it's hard to see. The truck does have a sunroof, which does work, but it is silicone shut just so that it doesn't, you know, rattle around with the cage work and all that. But the cage is tied into the body. It's welded in all the locations here along the plate, which is great. It's a 5-speed manual, like I mentioned, with a manual 4-wheel drive gearbox. These are the PRP seats that I put in there, much more comfortable. I got the headsets here as well. One of the things that I really love about this truck is that the factory dash is still in place and most of the factory interior is still in place. It just makes it feel like you're driving a regular truck and not something that's all raced out. It does have the factory door cards as well, crank windows, and manual door locks, which is great because it's just less things to break. I want to show you guys one of the most special parts of this truck to me. It's something that I consider myself very lucky to have, and I don't think very many other people in the world have this. What you're seeing right there is an Ironman Stewart signature dashboard. I did get that signed by the Ironman himself, Ivan Stewart, last year, and kind of a funny story of how that came about. I was actually called in for a casting call to have my truck be part of the Toyota commercial for their new Tacoma. They were showing off the heritage of the Toyota trucks over the years, and they wanted an old race looking Toyota truck for Ivan Stewart to actually drive in the commercial. And funny enough, they casted 2 trucks for that commercial. The other one is a friend of mine named Drew, who owned a red Toyota pickup just like this, same extra cab, 3-liter, long travel. It looked almost identical to this truck. And they ended up using his truck for the actual commercial, but it was still great to hang out with Ivan Stewart for the whole day and actually have him sign that dashboard. It was really great to meet him. He's one of my idols. As anybody in off-road racing knows, the guy is a legend for winning many Baja races, and the reason why they call him Ironman is because he does it all by himself. So pretty awesome that I have his signature here. I gotta take care of that. It's got some dust on it, so I'm gonna clean that up a little bit. Right next to the signature is a PCI Race Radio's 4-link Pro Elite, which is basically your intercom system, and it allows the race radio to go throughout the truck to the headsets. And you can see the pigtails here where they plug in to the headsets here, and you just pop them in, or if you have a helmet you can put it in there as well. I do have a RAM mount here, and this is for my tablet. I use GPS software for that, so it's always great to have GPS while you're on the trail. As you can see, a lot of really simple parts on this truck, but things were carefully laid out so that it's easy to work on, and it's easy to get parts for. A lot of the factory Toyota things are still on this, so I can just go to a parts store like AutoZone, O'Reilly's, whatever, and just buy whatever parts I need if I ever have anything break down. And that's actually happened before. I've done many trips where things have broken, and you know, I could just go to an AutoZone and buy the part there, and then fix it in the parking lot or whatever I need to do, and whatever it takes just to get it home. So I do really like that aspect of this truck, is how easy it is to work on and easy to find parts for. So I know you're probably asking yourself, why is this truck in the shop right now? Why does it look so dirty? Why is it covered in mud and has rust building up on it? Well, something happened at King of the Hammers this year. I was pretty convinced that the truck was done for good as far as the drivetrain goes. Basically, I had a motor mount let go while I was in a pretty deep whoop section, and I didn't realize that the motor was actually bouncing up and down on the front diff and the frame, where it actually had blown a hole through the oil filter and had dumped all the oil out of it. And to make matters worse, because the engine was tilted because of the broken motor mount, the fan was actually lodged up in the fan shroud, and so it wasn't cooling it. 2 days before all this happened, my temperature gauge on the dashboard broke, so I figured I'd just take things easy and not really worry about it that much until I got home and I could take a look at it. So I wasn't able to see that the motor was overheating. I actually made it into Hammertown, and somebody was like, "Hey man, you're losing a lot of oil." And to much of my surprise, I go, "What?" And I got out of the truck and I come around and I just see this puddle of oil leaking underneath the truck. And I knew that I had moments left for this motor because it was running really bad and it was steaming out of the overflow tank. So it was really dry of oil and it was overheating. My trailer was about 5 miles away, and I figured the best thing to do was just to get it back to camp as fast as I could, back to the trailer, so I could get it towed home. And the Toyota actually kept going. It lived. It actually drove with no oil and no coolant, probably running close to 240 degrees or so, for about 5 miles in stop and go King of the Hammers traffic. If you've never been to KOH, you know that race day is insane around the lake bed. I mean, it's almost like, driving through LA. It's just bumper to bumper for miles. And I was stuck in that. I didn't want to take another road and get stuck out in the middle of nowhere. I wanted to be on a main road if it did break down, so I stayed there and kind of took a chance. And I'm glad I did, because the truck actually made it all the way back to camp, and it didn't break or it didn't stop running. We got back to camp and assessed, what had gone wrong, basically the series of events that led to this happening, and broke things down and just really understood, what happened. And it turned out that, I was thinking the 3-liter was done because of all the things that people talk about, but it turned out that it wasn't even the motor's fault. It was my fault. I mean, the engine mount had broke, and I didn't stop and realize that it was broken. So it was really just due to driver negligence. It wasn't due to the motor itself being a bad engine for a lot of other people. Fast forward a few months, I took it back home, and it's been parked ever since. The truck doesn't really want to go down the highway very well because obviously the motor's hurt, but it does run, and it can drive it, in and out of the garage. And I figured that, in that defining moment of when you realize your truck is really broken, I did think to myself that, okay, this is your chance to really, really crank the volume up on this truck and just make it something ridiculously cool. And that's why it's here. I brought it down to my friends here at Sheer Performance. You met Justin and Sandy in episode 1 of Chasing Dust, where we were building the lunch truck, and episode 2 when we took it to LS Fest. These guys are fantastic at what they do. They're very honest mechanics. They know what they're doing. They got, between them, decades of experience, both in off-road and in, engines and hot rods. So I figured there's no better place to take it than somebody who I trust, and somewhere where I can go and actually work on the truck too with them if I wanted to. So I was really, really happy to hear Justin say that he'd love to work on the engine and work on the motor, and Sandy wanted to work on the suspension, and I was very, very stoked to hear that, because I think that we could really make this thing something cool. So first things first, we need a new motor. The easy option is to go with another Toyota V6 and just drop it in there and be done with it. But being as though I want to make this thing ridiculously crazy and a lot of fun, and I'm in Sheer Performance, which is known for their LS swaps, I figured why not drop an LS in this truck. Not a true LS, but still a LS based small block from GM. The 6-liter is exactly what I'm talking about here. Put down probably about 400 horsepower to the crank, give or take, which is 320 horsepower more than this engine currently makes. So that's a pretty big jump. And because we're gonna have so much more power, I wanted to make sure that the suspension can really handle that extra horsepower and torque. 12 inches of travel with 4-wheel drive that I currently have in this truck right now is great for a V6 engine if you're not planning on bombing down the road super fast and having to worry about your suspension soaking things up. The suspension right now outruns the motor in this truck. But as soon as you do an LS swap, that flips. That's when things become dangerous, is when your suspension isn't beefy enough or it can't handle the amount of power that you're going to put down. So I started thinking, what can I do with the front and rear suspension on this truck to make sure that it can handle the extra horsepower that the LS engine is going to be providing? A lot of different things came through my mind. Do I go with a wider suspension system? Do I go with a custom A-arm setup? Keep it IFS the way it is now? And I started doing the numbers, and that just sounded way too expensive. Then I remembered a few of my friends actually who have Toyotas have done a swap on the front suspension that is completely unconventional. I've only seen 3 in my entire life. So that's how uncommon this is. However, they work fantastic with the amount of travel they have and the motors that those guys have in their vehicles. So I figured why not just kind of draw that plan out a little bit and see what would come of it. Now, the type of front suspension I'm talking about is called a TTB, which is short for twin traction beam. And that only came on certain 80s and 90s Ford pickup trucks and Broncos. It's basically a twin I-beam setup, which also came on those old Ford trucks. But it does have a differential in the front of it, making it a 4-wheel drive setup. Keeping 4-wheel drive was very, very important to me, as this isn't just a desert truck for me. I do also do all kinds of wheeling with it. I go out in the mountains, I go in the snow with it. I like to be able to have four-wheel drive and use it when I need it. It's just been something I've always had on my Toyota vehicles, and it's been really, really great to have it on this truck, and I'd like to keep that. So TTB was sounding better and better the more I thought about it. But you can't just go buy some TTB axles off of a Ford truck or, you know, a junkyard or someone who builds them for the aftermarket and bolt them onto a Toyota. That's not at all how it works. There's a lot that goes into the way that they mount on the frame and how wide the frame is, and there's a lot of other components like steering and things like that that still, you know, have to be severely modified to make it work. I started talking to a few of my buddies who have done this swap before, and they seem to think the easiest way to make this work is to just cut the frame. I know how, trust me, I don't feel good about it, but cut the frame of the Toyota at the firewall and then go to a junkyard and buy yourself either an F-150 or a Bronco that's a roller chassis or some kind of a donor vehicle, or if you can just find the chassis itself and cut that off in the middle of the truck and then graft that Ford frame onto your Toyota frame and just weld it all up and make sure it's nice and strong, and then you have a TTB front end on a Toyota. So that solves the problem of the front suspension with the extra horsepower. The rear suspension, although it does have 16 inches of usable travel in the back, could use some upgrades. A leaf spring setup is okay for a lot of things, but when you're moving that fast over the desert, or if you're moving that fast over any kind of terrain, leaf springs tend to kind of pack up as you go over these consecutive bumps. The rear end of the truck tends to grow. And I've experienced that with this truck before, going a little bit too fast over some whoop sections, and I can feel the rear end growing, and it's not a fun feeling because you start looking down at the ground as you're going over these big bumps, traveling about 50 or 60 miles an hour. It's not very fun. What do you do to resolve that? The best thing you can do is do a triangulated four-link, which is a very common setup you find on desert trucks. Ultra 4, trophy trucks have them. It's just a very common, tried and true system, and a lot of guys with Toyota pickups have already done it. So that was pretty easy for me to land on, is changing the rear suspension from leaf spring to a triangulated four-link with trailing arms and have a coilover and a bypass shock on it, and basically make it a linked truck. I'm not knocking leaf springs at all because I love them. I've had them on all my other trucks, but this would be the first truck I have that's actually four-linked, and I want to make sure I do it right. So that's a real brief description of what I've got going on with this truck. LS swap, TTBs in the front, coilover bypass up front with a four-link system in the rear, also coilover bypass. I'm going to keep it on 35s because the truck just is going to move a lot better on 35s rather than going up to a 37-inch tire. It is still a compact truck. It's not a full-size truck. So 37s do work really well on full-size trucks, but on these smaller ones, you're better off sticking with 35s. So I'm going to keep these Ridge grapplers on there. They have plenty of life on them. I love these things and I don't want to change them, so they're great. It is, however, going to require me to change a lot on the bed cage. So I'm still in my head deciding if I want to cut the frame off and just do what they call a back half, which is basically just tubing the rear end instead of having an actual frame go all the way back to the rear bumper. You cut it off right at the cab, and then you build just steel tubing into a bed cage that goes behind it, and that's where you can mount your bump stop and you can mount your shock mounts in front of, you know, the axle there on the trailing arm. So that's gonna have to happen. If we want to make this really work well, we're gonna have to take all that out, put possibly a fuel cell back there, and of course anyone who's done a four-link system before knows that they work really, really well if you have a lot of weight behind the rear axle. So been dabbling with the idea of doing a dual spare system or putting a toolbox back there or some storage or something where I can really weigh the rear end down and keep the rear of the truck planted as you're going over the big bumps. You keep the front just kind of bouncing along and the rear is really taking the brunt of it. So that's the plan with the suspension. So now that you guys have a good idea of what's in store for Scarlett, what I'm going to be doing with it here shortly, I wanted to address a couple of the most commonly asked questions that I get, whether on Instagram or just in person. I get a lot of questions from people, and these are some of the more common ones. I'm just going to answer them for you guys in case you have the same question. So question number one, I made a little bit of a list here, so don't mind me reading off of it. Why do you like Toyotas and why not a full size? The short answer to that is that full-size trucks and mid-size trucks or compact trucks like this, they drive differently, especially off-road. I find that the mid-size trucks or compact trucks are a lot more nimble off-road when you're really, going around corners and going up and over things. You get a lot more feedback. I don't know if that makes any sense, but yeah, I feel a lot more feedback in the steering and the pedals and the suspension. I really liked the feeling of being able to take a corner hard and really lean into it. With a full-size truck, to me, it seems like the driver's a little bit more disconnected from what the vehicle is doing, and it's just much bigger, and it's a little bit harder to take through some of those tighter trails, especially up in the mountains. So my personal preference, I like smaller trucks better. Question number 2 is, what did I do to keep this 3-liter running for so long? Now, preface, this motor has 240,000 miles on it right now. What did I do to keep it running this long? Well, I've only owned it for about 3 years, and majority of those miles were put on the truck before I had it, but I can only tell you that I drove it very, very, very hard. And I did the maintenance on it at a bare minimum, like 5,000 miles or so. Did the oil change, and I did some, maintenance as far as like a coolant change and things like that every once in a while. But I would have to say I just neglected the thing and beat the heck out of it, and it just kept running. So I don't know. There's a lot of people that have problems with their 3.0s. I can't tell you why this one ran for so long. All I can tell you is I didn't treat it very well, and it still runs. So why? No idea. Another question I get a lot is, why am I not putting a 3.4 liter in it and making my life so much easier and having a running truck in about 2 weekends? Short answer, way too many people have done that, and it's not, to me, worth pulling a V6 out and putting another V6 back in the truck. If I'm gonna pull the motor out of it, I really want to put a V8 in there and just get that roar, that V8 roar. You just can't beat that sound. So coming from a truck that already, in my opinion, looks that good, it just makes sense to put something in it that's really, really fast. So that leads us into the next question. Okay, why are you going with the GM motor? Man, there are Toyota loyalists all over the internet who are just really, really upset that I'm not putting a 1UZ in this truck. If you don't know what a 1UZ is, it's a 4-liter V8 that Toyota made, and it actually came in a sedan that Lexus built back in the 90s, and I think the late 80s too. It's the LS400. So the 1UZ is a 4-liter V8 that makes a ton of noise. It's really, really loud if you open up the exhaust on it, but really doesn't make that much horsepower. I mean, it's like 220 horsepower or so. To the wheels, you're talking like, high 100s, 180 or so. It's just not enough to really warrant all the work that you have to do to get that 1UZ in there. Not to mention that parts aren't very readily available for that motor, and they're very readily available for the LS. And there's a lot more documentation for the LS. There's a lot more parts you can get at any parts store. They're just an easier platform to work with. So that's why I'm not doing a 1UZ. Sorry guys, I have a lot of friends that have 1UZs in their vehicles. I think it's great, and you guys kept it in the Toyota family, but for this particular project, I really, really wanted to go with a GM small block. So another really common question that I get with this truck, especially after, I usually get this question right after I'm done explaining what I got in store for this thing. People always ask me, so are you gonna race it? The answer is no. I'm not much of a racer myself. I did do a lot of motorsports when I was younger, but nowadays I really just like going out there and exploring and having fun and checking out new trails and hanging out with my friends and just camping in the desert. That's really more my speed. Racing is awesome. I go to a ton of off-road races and I love being around it, but it's such a huge investment, and oftentimes it lets you down a lot, but you do have a lot of fun doing it. I can admit that. But for my personal truck like this, I really don't feel like I'd want to do that with this truck and race it. I will do some more of the smaller, more enthusiast-based, competitive stuff like Jump Champs, which is fantastic. I love Jump Champs. It's one of my favorite events of the year. I've done it multiple times with this truck, and it's always been a blast. So I'll continue to do those, but you won't find me, you won't find my name on the entry list for the Baja 1000 anytime soon. I'll guarantee you that. And that brings me to my last most commonly asked question is, Matt, if you're gonna do all this stuff to this truck, why not just start out with a Bronco, which already has a TTB front end, capable of making amazing 4-wheel drive travel? link it, as many other people have done very easily in the rear, and then just do an LS swap that a lot of other people have done with their Broncos. Yeah, you're right. That is a really easy way of getting this done. However, I've been through a lot with this truck, and I have a connection with it in a way that I haven't had with another truck before. It's just like we seem to just kind of get along. I know how stupid that may sound to a lot of you guys, but this truck and I have a lot of history together. We've done some amazing things. We've been on amazing trails over the last 3 years, and I really don't want to just give up on this project after I killed it. I want to bring it back, resurrect it, and make it like the coolest thing ever. And plus, it's just so unique to have a Toyota with a TTB front end on it from a Ford, powered by a Chevy engine with a Ford rear axle and all custom suspension done on it. I just think that that would really stand out amongst the horde of other trucks out there that are built for the desert. And I'm really excited to get it done because it's really going to blow people's minds when it's finished. So the very first next step for me is to buy a donor vehicle, which is going to be either an F-150 or a Bronco with a Dana 44 TTB front, twin traction beam front setup on it, 4-wheel drive. And then that's what we'll use to hack the frame off and weld to this truck. That's going to be our very next step, and I'm on the hunt for a donor vehicle right now that I can find and do that with. And so, is that a cricket? I don't know if you guys can hear that, but there's a cricket chirping in here now. Of course. It's not even dark yet. Shut up. There we go. So I hope you guys enjoyed this episode of Chasing Dust. Again, a little bit more of what my own personal projects are all about. I've personally never taken on something like this before, so it's going to be a lot of new territory for me, but I think it's going to be another great learning experience. And that's really how I've always been able to learn and grow myself, is by just taking on things that I never thought that I could do before. Of course, with the help of some friends here at Sheer Performance in Costa Mesa, I think we're going to get it done. It's going to be really, really cool. I appreciate you guys following along. Watch some of the other episodes that I have out there if you haven't already. Please like, share, comment, subscribe to Driving Line. I'm going to be doing a lot more of these episodes, like I said. So that's it for today's episode, guys. I appreciate you guys watching and following along. Subscribe to Driving Line if you guys want to get more of these videos from Chasing Dust and all of the other really cool videos that we make there at the office. If you guys have any ideas for what I should do with this truck, or if you guys have any wild, crazy plans, or maybe some tips that may make my life a little easier building this thing after hearing what I want to do with it, please put it in the comment section. I love to read these. And if you have any other questions that I didn't really go over in this video, I want to hear about it. So drop it in the comments. I'll answer you guys. I promise I will. I love doing that and giving you guys all the information you want to hear. So Scarlett's going to be hanging out here for a little while in the shop. I'm going to go and try to find some more parts that I need to gather, and then pretty soon we're going to start tearing into this thing. Thanks for hanging out with me today, guys. I'll see you next time. Desert Chief out.